Hey everybody, welcome to week 5 here at Portland State. We are learning about Java, and we're kind of, gosh, at the halfway point almost in the course. And boy, have we covered a lot. The first part of this course, there's just a lot of information, a lot of ramp up. Some things are probably familiar to you, but there's probably a lot of stuff that is new. Um, and Let's see here. Tonight we have a couple of things on the agenda. I want to start out with some Prime Minister's questions to answer any concerns or gather any feedback that you have here tonight on the projects that you've done so far. And then I was looking at sort of the schedule for the rest of the course, and I was thinking about Project 5, which is the next project. And I wasn't going to assign that until next week because next week is when you watch the lectures all about the web. But for a couple of reasons, I decided that this is probably a better week to introduce it, mainly because we've got some time here to sort of kick things off. And in Project 5, you create a new Maven project, and I want to make sure that everybody has that working so that next week we can really dig into the code and start exploring what the client server REST API program is all about. So we're going to do that tonight. And then we have our final in-class pair programming kata. And so then we'll, in the last part of class, we'll be focusing on that. So lots of good stuff, some new things. And I encourage everybody to stay around for the pair programming. You've already done it before. I think this will be a good one. This will be a little bit more challenging, a little bit more interesting than the last two. But first, let's start off with Prime Minister's questions. What can I tell you? What's your week been like? What questions do you still have? What was surprising about Project 3? What questions do you have about Project 4? Things like that.
I have a kind of general question.
Yeah.
So I was wondering, like, using exceptions, I end up kind of not really returning a data type because for the command line parser, there's just a lot of verification. I don't know what the best practices that, like, is it okay just to have void functions that either throw an error or don't, or
Yes. So, as we've learned about in Java, the way that you convey that something unexpected has happened is that you throw an exception. And actually, this is a nice programming language construct. I don't know if any of you have ever learned about how errors are conveyed in a language like C, but standard practice, or as it was years ago when I was learning it, is that you'd have something like global variable, which is an error code, and you have to check that error code all the time. And that made your program's logic really complex because you were always performing some operation and you had to say, oh, hey, did it either return an error code or did it send a global error code? And if your function returns some other value, then you need to have sort of magic numbers. Like you sort of see in some APIs, like when you go to read a bunch of bytes from an input stream, if the input stream is done, it returns -1. Okay, maybe that's not terribly unusual, but it's still a magic number. So I like exceptions because, hey, when something is wrong, the way you convey that something is wrong is that there's a whole other object there. And sure, you still have to account for yourself to catch it. But that, seems so much more exceptional to me than just having to check some error code. So because an exception is an object, it has a class and therefore a type. And so then you can use that to convey more information about what went wrong. So I guess we really didn't dive into it too much in that student class that we were writing in weeks 1 and 2. But for instance, when you're doing some data validation, or like for instance in your class, in your projects, when you were validating the date, an option would be, hey, you have a method, a function that you call to pass in a string, and project 3, maybe you have a return a date object, or if it can't parse it, I suppose the date format API will throw an exception for you, but prior to using the date format API, you can say, oh, hey, if it didn't match the format that I expected, throw an exception. And that way you can then convey the error via an exception. Next week, when we dive into the code for Project 5, you'll see where this is also very helpful. So in projects, in the command line projects, projects 1 through 4, when you want to convey an error message to the user, what do?
System error.
Yes, you print something to system.error. Now, when you're running inside a web server, your user, who is the person who is making the web call, so a REST client or someone who's viewing a website, they don't see system error, right? And so you need a different mechanism to convey that. If you use an exception in your backend code, your logic, so the thing that will read from a file, or will process, or will add a flight to an airline. If that code makes no assumptions about whether or not it's running in a command line environment or a web server environment, and merely throws an exception and say, hey, something went wrong, it then becomes a choice of the client, the code that calls that other code, to determine what to do with it. And so if you're running in a command line tool, sure, I'll print an error to standard error. If I'm in a web application, I might return a 404 error code, or something like that, or a whatever, a 300 or 4. Anyway, we'll talk more about it next week, right? So anyway, that's, for me, that's like the real value of exceptions, and that's where I like to put them into effect, to be able to abstract away the fact that, well, to be able to actually, on the one hand, be very concrete about, oh, hey, there was an error, but also have it expressed in a generic enough way that it's up to the client of the code to determine what to do with it. How did I do? Did that answer your question?
Yeah, thanks.
Cool.
So when you said like the up to the client, does that mean essentially like you're still going to throw exceptions, but then within whatever the driver code is, you're going to have a catch that will do? Okay, cool.
Absolutely right. And sort of the hey, canonical example is parsing the date, but also anything that might have a problem, like looking up an airport for the airport code, or when parsing your file, right, by abstracting out, or really making the conveyance of an error condition part of the programming interface of your object. You then have then you have a lot more flexibility in terms of how you handle it, as opposed to tightly coupling your application logic and your error reporting. Okay, this projector is not coming back on. I'm unplugged in. Sorry, give me a minute here. Hopefully, I didn't mess everything up. Good deal. Actually, did I lose my screen share? Looks like I did. Okay. I'm going to share my screen again. Let's see, your question, does Project 5 build off of 1, 2, 3, and 4? It does. And we'll talk about it, I'm not gonna, I mean, you've just finished up Project 3. I want you to focus on Project 4. So tonight, I think what I'll do is just focus mainly on how to build Project 5 and how to run the various components of it. And then we'll talk about the details and the requirements next week. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, the bugs in Project 3 and 4, some of them might impact your Project 5. Although in Project 5 there won't be any more. Well, actually, no, sorry, there is some command line parsing. Never mind. We'll be doing command line parsing and web stuff. Nice. Any questions for me? I had a couple questions for you. How did Project 3 compare to Project 2? Easier, harder, about the same, completely different? More annoying, more bugs. There you go. Oh, date formats, yeah? Say more about some of the annoyances of the date format. Mm-hmm. Gotcha. Okay, so like, yeah, I said, hey, use the date format class that uses Java yield date, and there's some deprecated things, yeah, in date, and then there's, oh yeah, probably like the local date time and all of the new date stuff. Sorry, what was that? Oh yeah, we weren't using calendar. Actually, you'll use calendar in project 4, but that's true. We're not really manipulating dates, but I think we'll have a chance to use the calendar object in project 4. Um, oh, some other feedback and commentary. Project 3 went better for me than project 2. Much smoother. Has already implemented a class to extend simple date format. Okay, good. Looks like, yep, someone got a good head start. Seemed a bit easier, but maybe I'm getting more comfortable with Java. Well, that's the intent too. So, like, hopefully by now, sort of the things that were challenging on week 1 are becoming more familiar to you. And then, yep, some learning about date format. I was able to reuse a lot of code. Okay, well, that's good to hear. Yeah, good. That matches the experience of students in the past. Hopefully everybody's familiar with the development environment and some of the fundamentals of command line parsing and writing unit tests and things like that. Good learning around refactoring. That yeah, maybe made the code better, but it took a long time. Don't know if that's a mistake necessarily, but yeah, that's why it's good learning, right? That's what you're paying for, learning. Yeah, awesome. Okay. Refactoring it feels like Frankenstein code. That's okay. It'll get better. You'll learn. Let's continue to do that. It's better to. The nice thing about Git though is that like if your code gets like completely messed up, you can always go back in time and recover your old code. Um, I know I've done that a lot. Right. And then there is the challenge of getting to 75% code coverage. Yep, that is I think the easiest way to get to 75% code coverage is to do test-driven development. That's just the easiest way to get there. It's not an easy thing to do. And all right, this is all intentional and part of what I hope you're learning in the course is to, if not write your test first, write your test shortly after your code to help you explore what it is that your code really does and the functionality it provides. But yeah. And writing the test first. It is a skill. And here again, so it's better. Trust me, it's better to learn that skill here than it is once you're writing production code and then you realize that you've written a whole bunch of bugs and have no idea how to test it. And it's why I encourage you to leverage things like the pair programming to develop your test-driven development skills. That's sort of what the environment's for. And I've chosen katas. I don't know so much tonight's katas, but certainly the first couple of katas that we've done were meant to be things that you can write tests first for relatively easily.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I had a question about writing the test. Excuse me. So if you have a function that writes something out to a file, if you want to test it wrote that out to a file correctly, is that something that would be better for like an integration test, or is it appropriate to use unit tests?
That's a great question. So if like the thing that you're really testing, the important thing that you're testing is that you are writing to a file, yes, you'll have to, using an integration test. Well, you can use an integration test for that. Although a unit test with like the @tempter annotation on one of the parameters will probably get you there too because it'll clean up everything for you. That being said, what I like to do is like when I've got something like, hey, I'm performing some operation, I'm generating some output to a destination. I like to abstract that destination away and test it there. So I think I tried to do that. Let me get the code up here. Do I still have it? Come on. Wait. Intelligent is just waking up after a long nap, apparently. Oops. Window. Intelligent. There we go. Yeah. Okay, so let's see. I take a look at what I mean, because I was talking about what abstracting away things. What are you talking about? So, sorry, so I can see this Windows out. Actually, I'm probably looking at the code right here. Okay, so this is the XML stuff. It's probably not what I want, but let's go look at it. So let's see here. Like probably the text dumper test. This is a this is a good example of it. Okay, so you might have noticed this when you were working with the out of the box text dumper. So the out of the box text dumper class. The constructor takes a writer. And you know, as you'll recall from the Java I/O lecture, a writer is just this abstract class that just knows how to write characters someplace, right? And so it's got methods like, well, it's got methods like write that takes character array or a string. And then there are specific kinds of writers, like a print writer and a file writer. And there's a whole lecture about it, right? If I remember the class I had. Or maybe it's up through that part. But anyway, and so there are all these different kinds of writers. But here I'm purposely using the most abstract kind of writer because that's all I need. Basically, a text dumper, you know, its responsibility, its purpose is to take an airline and write it someplace. The text dumper doesn't really care why, and as a matter of fact, in Project 5, you'll see why it's really important it doesn't care why, because in projects 1, 2, 3, and 4, well, sorry, in projects 2, 3, and 4, you are writing to a file, but in Project 5, you're going to write to a web request, a response to a web request. And you'll see how, if you've abstracted things appropriately, you won't need to change your text dumper code to be able to write to a completely different destination. For me, this is really, you know, programming to the interface and working at the highest level abstraction. The lowest level abstraction that is absolutely necessary. So, as you can, and so then the text dumper, because all it takes is a writer, means that when I test the text dumper, I don't have to use files. And so here, what I do is the kind of writer that I send to the text dumper is actually something called a string writer. And a string writer provides the writer interface that writes not to a file or to a socket, but it writes to a string that's there in memory. But the text dumper doesn't know, doesn't care. It just knows that it's writing to some writer. And so this way in my test, I can create a text dumper from my string writer, and when I dump an airline to it, where it dumps it to is the string writer, and so I can get the string value that was written to the string writer and use that here in my test to compare. And so then that is a much faster test. You know, writing to a file, the file writing is pretty fast for this kind of thing. But it means that, you know, I have things isolated, and it helps me decouple the logic of converting an airline to some text format, which is what a text dumper does, from the destination to where it's actually being written. So this gives me a lot of flexibility. And I can't remember what your question is right now. So did I answer it?
Yeah, that answered it. Thank you.
That's good. Nice. Let's see here. Oh, the cones are next week. Hope everybody's finishing them off. Hey, how about Project 4? Has anybody here started to look at Project 4? Any questions about that? And hey, if you haven't, that's all right. Experience shows that the XML is just different. It's not terribly difficult. You just got to figure out the API for it. And so, you know, please be sure to watch the lecture. Yeah, that's probably a good way to learn that stuff. Someone shared something. Oh, some stuff here is going by. Yep, some more questions, some more discussion about test, you know, how to write the test first. That's good. Oh, leveraging Jacoco files to tell you what is missing in the coverage. Yes, I mean, so if you find that you haven't gotten the required code coverage, generate the reports, and see, hey, what parts of your code haven't been tested. That will inform either like the next test that you write, or to ask yourself, if you can't figure out how to exercise that code, then maybe the code isn't necessary. And here again, this is part of the feedback that your test suite provides, is to say, hey, if there's code that's not being executed, and I can't think of a way to invoke it in a test, then do I really need it? Question. Each unit test should have one assert, right? It seems very redundant. Sometimes use the same test, but check a different conditional branch like an exception. That's a great question, Max. And this is something that is, it's a point of debate within the test-driven development community. You know, there's some people who are very adamant about, you want one thing tested and one thing only tested in a test. And I mean, and there's some advantages to that, right? That way, you will, if you've got two different assertions, so let's say that there are like, hey, perform some operation, and there are like 3 different things that you want to assert about that. Well, if the first one fails, you have no idea about the other 2. They could also fail, they could also pass, and that would all tell you, that would tell you interesting information. And so then they would advocate for saying, nope, it doesn't matter if you're sort of doing the same arrange and act 3 different times, you're always doing one assert. And of course, factor your code so that it's, so the code isn't duplicated unnecessarily. But they would say to do that. Other people would say that they're being more pragmatic by maybe making code easier to read by saying, hey, I'll do one arrange, one act, and then multiple asserts. Gosh, if those are the things that you're fighting over, you're doing test-driven development pretty well. And so then that I've always chalked that up to more of a stylistic choice. And that's certainly not don't beat yourself up over in your first 6 weeks of test-driven development that, oh no, you have multiple assertions. I gotta admit, most of the time I'm in the multiple assertion camp just for practical purposes. I want to go fast, and usually and there are times where hey, I want to check about multiple side effects of performing the operation, and so I'll do that. I'm sure I make Kent Beck cry all the time. I'm sorry, Kent. Excellent. Anything else for Prime Minister's questions? Okay, let's talk about Project 5. Now, Project 5 and 6 are completely different from Projects 1, 2, and 3 because they are not command line programs. Now, let me just post the thing here, the assignment to everyone in the meeting, so you can follow along at home. So the whole idea here is that instead of just one Java program that is the main method, right? Your main method will take the command line arguments and just do the whole thing. So parse the flight out of the command line arguments, figure out what the options are, perform all the operations, do all the output, and then exit, right? This is what command line program is all about. It's probably the vast majority of programs that you've worked with in your career as a software engineer, and it's a great place to start because they're pretty straightforward. However, in Project 5, we're dealing with 2 Java programs that talk with each other. And I'm just going to tell you right now, this is fundamentally different. This is concurrent programming. And while I think this is a pretty straightforward example of concurrent programming, it's very different. You have to think about things differently than you're used to. And then when we talk about the Android application, that's different along a number of different dimensions. Now, I want to acknowledge that I don't expect to have watched the Getting Started with, the Foundations of the Web lecture. So I'm not going to go into too many details about the URLs and things called servlets and all of that. So we're not going to look at the code tonight, but we're going to look at the project, because we're going to build the project. We're going to build the project together and make sure that everybody can get started. But the bottom line is that there are two parts to your program. As a matter of fact, I'm just going to put up where's the picture? There's the picture. I think this is the most, for me, I think this is the most interesting and most relevant. Okay, so we have two Java programs that talk to each other over a web, over a socket that uses the HTTP protocol. On the right here, we have the web server. It's something called a Jetty web container you'll learn about in the lecture. And it's got some Java code in there that is your airline application. However, here when you interact with your airline application, it's not via a command line interface and writing to files. Instead, you'll use many of the same objects, like your airline and your flight and your XML parser and dumper. Oh no, your XML dumper, I guess, not your parser. You'll use many of those same classes from projects 1, 2, 3, and 4. But instead of running in a command line program that starts and ends, it runs in a web server that just stays up, right? It runs, and what it does is it waits for requests. And the requests come in via HTTP. So HTTP is the protocol that's used by the web. And I mean, I assume everybody's familiar with what a URL looks like. If you don't know all the pieces parts, you'll learn about that in the lecture. But a URL is how you interact with a web server, right? You make an HTTP request, and the URL is part of the request. But again, I'm going to try to not dive into those details tonight. And a URL, and maybe you're not terribly familiar with this, has a host and a port. And so the host is the name of the machine, and the port is the conceptual hole in that machine that you communicate through. And so then when you run the web container, the web application, you say you're running it on a host, and we'll just make things easy. Everything will run on a local host. And you say what port it runs on, so it'll run by default on port 8080. And it just sits there and waits for someone to talk to it. And a variety of, and really, it'll accept a request from anything that speaks HTTP. So we'll see that you can communicate with the web server over from a web browser, right? You can type in the URL and you can get information, or you can use an HTML form, which is, I don't know if you've ever worked with forms before. I guess they're kind of old school at this point, but it's really what underlies a lot of the web. It's a way of gathering information from the web browser and then sending it to the web. Sorry, gathering information in the web browser and sending it to the web server. And also, we're going to write a Java client as a Java program. Nothing really special about it, except that what it does is it makes HTTP requests of the web server also. And again, this is very different from what you've been working with so far, but hopefully you'll see it's an evolution of things, and you've gotten really good at writing command line applications. So hopefully things like command line parsing will be relatively straightforward. I've got some other boxes here talking about like this thing called a servlet and the airline REST client. We'll talk about those next week. The code, we'll dive into it next week. Here we'll create the code and then make sure that the code can be built, but that's everything that we're going to do here. So that's the architecture of what we're doing. Again, I'm not going to talk about the details of the assignment. Hey, you can read over it. Instead, what I'm going to do is let's get started with, oops, I don't have a create. Oh, there it is, REST project. Oh, and sorry, I don't have the command description anymore. I need to get rid of that. Okay. So then, because this application, because Project 5 is so different from the first ones, because it's got the web server, we need to create a new Maven project for it, a new code base. And so then, any classes that you need for your Project 4 in Project 5, just copy over the source code. And go from there. We're not going to try to evolve your Maven project from being a simple command line program to being a web application with the command line program. I've done all that for you, and we'll just create a new pom.xml for that. So what I want to walk through next is the process of creating this project, which you can do with a create REST project script that's in your repository. And what it'll do is it'll create a new Maven project, which gets you started with this with Project 5 by making a simple dictionary application where you basically store words and their definitions in the web application. I think the intent here is that there's some amount of scaffolding that I want to provide for you so you can focus on doing the interesting things. And actually, in some respects, what Project 5 is refactoring this skeleton project to do the things that your airline needs to do, which again, we'll talk about the requirements next week. So let's do that. Oh, there I am. Wait a second, sorry. Okay. What do you mean I have stop jobs? There we go. Okay. Right. So here is my my repository. Just like you have a repository, it was created from a clone of. Created from a template, the Getting Started repository template. It's got things like my Cones project, my airline that I created, and it's also got this script for creating the REST project. So I'm going to run that now. Create REST project. And okay, good. It's in there and it's doing it. It read information from my me.xml. And it's creating a new project. Let's see here. It is called Airline Web. So if I do a get status of airline web, I want to add that. And then, as you can see, there is a ton of files. We're going to commit those. Actually, we're not going to really change anything tonight. But let me just get commit -m added. Oh, I also want to add XML because that have changed also, and say get commit added files for project 5. Push that up. Nice. Okay. Oh, and actually, I need 2 windows tonight, don't I? So here's what. Okay, so we're going to. Here's how this works. It's a little different. There are 2 pieces parts, and by the way, I encourage everybody to follow along at home. And if anybody encounters any problems creating the project, or if I do something and it doesn't work for you, please speak up. What we're doing here tonight is not only am I walking through this, but I want you to be trying it yourself, so we can just make sure that by the end of our discussion tonight, that everybody has Project 5 created and that it runs for them in their environment. And the reason I want to do this is so that we can spend our entire time together focusing in on the code and not so much on the mechanics of getting started. So actually, let's go back to the picture, the map of the world here that we're following. Okay, so you've got the Jetty web container that is the web application, and then you've got your client. And what I'm going to do here in these 2 windows, and those are both programs, those are both Java programs. So I'm going to do over here on the right is I'm going to run the web application, and I will do that by invoking Maven W, and I want to say actually the first thing I want to do is I want to run clean verifies, which I always do just to make sure that we can build everything. Now you'll notice that the build process for the web application takes longer and does a bunch more things. We'll see the details next week, but just like with your command line projects, there's code to compile, There are unit tests to run. So even for the web stuff, there are unit tests. And there are artifacts to assemble, but they're different artifacts. In addition to the jar file or in the command line program, there is also the web application, the WAR file that you'll learn about in the lecture, that contains all of the code for the web application. And then the Maven build also runs integration tests, but these integration tests are different. So as you may recall, when we talked about what integration tests are, these are these are kind of heavyweight tests that require external dependencies. Now, for the command line projects, our integration tests, ran the command line, and that was kind of neat and everything, but not terribly complex. Here, on the other hand, our integration tests start up a web server, we'll deploy the code to it, and then run tests against that web server, making the actual REST API calls, which is something that you want to do. But of course, that takes time. And so then, that's why it was more like 30 seconds to run this whole thing as opposed to 10 seconds to run just the command line one. And okay, good, everything ran. So again, first thing after you create your project, run a Maven clean verify just to make sure everything works. Okay, the next thing I want to do is I want to start the web server. And the way I do that is by running this command here. So it's Maven again. So luckily Maven has good support for running all of this stuff for Project 5. And we use a command that looks a little different from the ones that we have before. We say Maven Jetty run. Now Jetty is the name of the web server, the web container, that your web application runs in. And so we say, hey, run the web application, start up the server and run the web application. And it's great that it has this support. Because otherwise, boy, you'd have to download Jetty yourself, run it and deploy everything. Maven takes care of all of this for you. And so then you don't have to deal with the details. Of course, you have to know enough Maven to be able to handle it, but it looks like, okay, yeah, it looks like things went pretty well here. There is a bunch of warnings and stuff like that. Don't worry about it. It doesn't actually cause any problems. Some interesting things to note in this debugging output, or this logging output, I guess. It talks about things like, hey, you got 4 zeros and 8080. This means that it's running on localhost that actually is bound to the, is that the loopback? I never remember. But it's running on port 8080. And again, a port is like this conceptual hole in the back of your computer that other computers can talk to. But you can also talk to yourself through those ports. Great. So now I've got actually I've got something. I've got a web server running on port 8080. So let's just go take a look at it. So here in my web browser, if I hit the URL localhost then port 8080. It returns something. It gives me a 404 not found, but it does say, hey, there is a there's something at the airline /airline. Did you want to do that? The answer is yes. So it's talking about all of the contexts or web applications. Context is kind of it's a Jetty word for it. Web applications running. It's our airline REST service API. Our airline REST service application. And so you can click on this here. Now you go to the URL, which is /airline, and you get some HTML. That's what's being returned here, and we can interact with it. What command is it to run the web project? Yeah, let me just type that in again. I'm just going to start it and restart it. Let me just from the airline directory. Yeah, so I will just. I'll just type this in. Nope, I will just type this in. There you go, that. And that has to be invoked from the airline web directory. Yeah, I'll run my airline again, or I'll run my web application again. There's also stuff in the assignment, but thanks for asking for some clarification. Okay, so I'm running my airline again. I'm going to refresh this page, but it still loads. So this is what the web application does when it, the the URL gets sent from the browser, or really any HTTP client, and then some stuff is returned. And what's returned is this HTML page. And this allows you to interact with the web application. Next week we'll talk about sort of the source code for this and everything. Just note that this is for demonstration purposes, and for if you're like, hey, if you're like super familiar with HTML forms and you want to play around with it, great, that's awesome. This is not part of the assignment though, so you don't have to update this page because you will be changing the inputs and outputs of the program to be go from a dictionary to the airline. Oh, question: is the best way to take down the server just Control-C? That works. That's practical. There is, if in another window, I think. Let's see here. I think here we can also send it a Jetty stop if you really want. I think that then will run. Yeah, that shut it down. But Control-C is whatever it does. Okay. Now, this is a very simple application that demonstrates how to do some web stuff. And again, it's a dictionary, and so you can do things like list all word definition pairs. And when I hit the URL, airline/flights, now flights here, because this is the skeletal application, flights are your dictionary entries. We'll see a better example in a moment. When you hit the URL like just flights, there's nothing here because there are no entries in the dictionary. But if you start making some, if you start saying things like doe is a deer, a female deer, and you hit submit, that makes what's called an HTTP post to the web server, which creates a mapping and returns a little message saying, hey, we define doe as a deer, a female deer. And notice that the URL is /airline/flights. If I go back to airline again, and I ask, and then I say, hey, now tell me all of the word definition pairs. Now there's one entry in the dictionary, which is doe, a deer, female deer. So let's create another one. Ray, a drop of golden sun. Need to have a wider text field right there. Click submit. It defined a new one. And now I can look at both pairs. I get all of this stuff. And by the way, what I'm doing here is every time I click that submit button, it makes a request back to the server to ask it for some information. So I was like, hey, tell me all of the flights. Tell me all of the dictionary entries. Or I can say, hey, for a given word like doe, just tell me the definition for that. Okay. And so what this is meant to give you a demonstration of is how to communicate back and forth. So I've got this web application that will serve up this HTML page, and you can use this HTML page to interact with it. So that's one client. Oh, a couple questions. Questions come in. Where is this data being? I think this would be data. Where is this data being stored? In the airline web folder locally or a database somehow? The answer is neither. It's being stored in memory, right? So right now, and we'll look at the code next time, it's just stored as a map in memory, which means that if I kill my web server, and now if I kill my web server and then try to reload the page, it's like, I can't reach your site because your web server isn't running. Then if I go and I restart my web server, and reload my page, and then I again ask for the definition of doe, it returns a 404 because the word doe doesn't exist. I've lost my dictionary because I stored my dictionary in memory and I exited my JVM. For project 5, you've already demonstrated that you know how to write to a file. I'm not going to make you do that. Instead, you can store your airline information, and actually it's about multiple airlines in project 5, as I recall, in memory. It's okay. So okay, I get a 404, so now I will go back and repopulate. Oh, thank you, browser. Okay, right, yeah, and someone who hasn't started yet also got a 404. That's the way it works, right, when the data is not there. Again, back to how do you convey errors? Well, in HTTP, as we learned about in the lecture, there are all these different error codes for telling, for conveying different kinds of error. 404 means that there was something that I was looking for and couldn't find, like the definition of the word dough. Awesome, okay. So we have, and I'm just gonna populate this again. So Shriyoshi, did you create the mapping between Doe and Ray already? Oh, you did, really, and you got a 404. Interesting, please try it again. Because yeah, one important thing to note is that we're just, when I'm talking about localhost, that's just running on the local machine. And so, it's not like you can I can't give you a URL, I mean, I could, but I'm not going to give you a URL where you can use my machine. Everything runs locally. That's the whole idea. And so then I'll just put in Ray again. I'm understanding the second one isn't working for you. So you do see it. Okay, and do you have things spelled correctly? I'd just be surprised as all. Let's see here. Doe, yeah.
Can I share my screen?
Yeah, sure.
For a minute, yeah.
Okay. So then, yeah, so can you go back, please? And can you print all of them? I bet you have a space after the dough. So, yep, yeah, there it was. So yeah, now do that. And then, yep, that's there. And then if you look at all of them, the top button, I think you'll see it there twice. Yep. One's got a space, one doesn't. So, things like that, I mean, actually, thank you so much for sharing that, because that really is a good lesson about input validation. And how, I guess it doesn't really matter whether it comes from a command line or whether it comes from a web page, but it's always important to do some amount of validation of your input. It doesn't seem like an error if it's got white space, but you might want to trim white space from both sides, or at least consider those kinds of things as you're developing your application. And of course, when you're developing web applications, it's incredibly important to do the appropriate amount of input validation for anything that you're going to store in the database or spit back to the user to make sure that they aren't injecting bad data into your application. But that's a topic for another. Okay. So we have been using this. Let's see, I'm sharing my screen. We've been using this simple web page to populate our dictionary. So, and this web page, though, is just merely one client of our web application. So, we've got our web application, running here. And in addition to the to starting the web application, the Maven project also creates a command line tool for interacting with it. And so then you run this just like you did what's it called? Airline client.jar. So hey, it's a Java command line program, and it takes some arguments. And so then let's see here. It takes the host and the port. Oops, localhost. That's the name of the host. The port is 8080. Now I don't give it any other arguments. I think what it'll do is it'll print the contents of the dictionary. There it is. The way it does this is it makes the same HTTP call that the web browser does. So here, when you ask for them all, the way it gets this data is just by sending this URL. So localhost:8080 airline/flights just sends that to the web application, and that's what's returned. And that's exactly what the command line program does. So here's the thing. The nice thing about a web server and the HTTP protocol is that it's all standard, right? And so then it doesn't, so multiple clients can interact with it, and the server doesn't care. It's just like, oh yeah, someone's asking me for all my flights. Okay, here you go. It doesn't really care whether or not that's a web browser, whether or not it's a Java program, anything else, any kind of device or whatever. It doesn't really care who the client is. And this gives us a lot of flexibility and decouples things nicely. And so similarly, you can use the command line program to get the definition of a single item, or you can add new ones. As a name, I call myself. Right, so I defined it over here, and now if I go and reload this page, there it shows up. Because again, it just sent the thing. The web server, it doesn't care, right? Okay, someone told me to put some stuff in, great, I'll take that, it seems valid, I'll put it in. Oh, someone asked for everything, great. It doesn't care who the client is. And sort of that's how this program works. We've got two, again, back to the picture on the page. Oops. We've got the web container that's over here just doing its thing. That is the application, and various clients make requests of it, and sometimes the requests populate data, and sometimes the requests fetch data. And then the client does what the client's going to do with it. Right now, this is a very simple example. The project itself, you do some more interesting things. But before I sort of start sketching that out, any questions so far? And has anybody encountered an impediment creating the project and beginning to work with it?
I don't have an impediment, but I was just looking at like the requests on the page. Are we just going to be sending like text back and forth, or are we going to be sending like XML over
I
the
believe it's
HTTP?
XML.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, it's like XML over HTTP, which if you have abstracted out the destination from your XML dumper, then it becomes pretty easy. If the XML dumper is like tightly coupled to write to only to files, you're not writing to files now. You got to write it to someplace else. Oh, thanks for
Cool,
pasting
thanks.
in that command. Yeah, nice. So again, we'll go into all the details of this, but just sort of at a high level, look at that. Yeah, that's a good point. I don't talk about how the format of the data back and forth. Now, the out-of-the-box application, the format is just some text, and if you then when we look at the code, we'll see how we can, we have a simple text dumper and a simple text parser for this. You'll be using XML. Which is cool because since everybody uses the same XML format, because we all comply to the DTD, which you'll learn all about this week as you're working on Project 4, it means that anybody's client can work with anybody's server. And that's the whole idea of REST APIs, is that we use a standard communication protocol in HTTP, and we use standard data formats, either XML or JSON, or there are some that have like custom text formats, or if you're working in a specific industry that has certain text formats. The whole idea is that it's standard, is that both the server and the client agree on the communication protocol, HTTP, and the data format that's sent over that protocol. And now, as long as you agree on that, hey, it doesn't matter what programming language things are written in. It doesn't matter what kind of client you are, whether you're a web application, right? This abstracts all these things out. And then this has enabled so many things in contemporary software and software development. And so then what I hope you get out of this though is just some very fundamental concepts in terms of how to write a pretty simple and straightforward web application, and using some of the lower level APIs like the servlet API. If anybody's done this, professionally, yeah, there's lots of other stuff built on top of it, and the frameworks, kind of come and go, and yeah, there's some standards and stuff. But here, I think it's important to learn about a little bit about the HTTP protocol, and then also how Java represents the HTTP protocol in Java objects. We'll dive into all of that next week. We'll also see how to test all this stuff, which is pretty cool for some definition of cool. I think that's everything. Let's see here. Do Java web apps generally use XML, or does it depend on the application? It does depend on the application, but I would say generally, I mean, JSON seems to be the format of choice. So if in case you're not familiar with what JSON is, actually, kids today probably are. But anyway, it's the JavaScript object notation. It's basically representing objects using braces and then colon key value pairs to represent a piece of data, an object, basically. And it's nice and compact, and it's pretty readable both by computers and humans. I use XML in here because in the longer version of the course, the 11-week version of the course, I think it's just good to see how the XML APIs work. I suppose maybe someday I can replace it with JSON. Maybe I will. But the XML is I think good enough. You learn some good lessons there about how to work with a parsing API. So I think those are the fundamentals of Project 5. Again, is there anyone that wasn't able to get their project working, or has any other questions? One other thing that you want to be sure to do, if you've worked on the command line to create the project and add everything to GitHub, you want to sync up your IntelliJ project by reloading all files from disk. And I would expect that then to give me a little Maven pop-up, but maybe not. I'm still thinking about it. Frameworks detected. Oh yeah, there it is. It's reading things, new dependencies. Airline. Oh, it looks like it automatic. For me, it might have automatically loaded it. You might also need to refresh your or sync your Maven projects to make sure that your airline directory shows up in bold, meaning that it is a project as opposed to just a directory. You've probably experienced with the cones and other things, and the katas and stuff. But yeah, just to make sure. We won't. I'm going to resist the urge to dive into the code tonight because I want to make sure you can watch the lecture first. But yeah, just make sure that you've got a whole bunch of stuff here, and you can. Anyway, let me know if anybody has problems with their IntelliJ after you've created the project.
Actually, I had an IntelliJ problem I wanted to ask you about. So when I was doing my project yesterday, I kept on getting an error from JUnit that said failed to discover tests, and it was caused by like a class not found exception. I was able to rebuild the project and that fixed it. But I just want to know like what caused that, if you have any idea.
And actually, let me make sure it's the one that I'm familiar with. Let's see, the testing too. I think. Let's see here. Is it like this one, test engine with IDG discover tests?
Yep, that's exactly it.
Yep. So this, I believe, it is caused by an interaction between the Jacoco code coverage and IntelliJ. So as I might have mentioned last week or the week before, the way the code coverage works is that it takes the compiled bytecode and then annotates it, augments it, enhances it with additional bytecode that keep track of all the instructions and stuff. So, but as you can imagine, once it's been enhanced, IntelliJ looks at this enhanced bytecode, like, what the hell is this? And maybe even JUnit kind of looks at it and says, what the hell is this? And so then things get confused. And so then, yes, rebuilding your project works. Running a Maven clean also seems to work. I don't have any better solutions, but yeah, that's a confusing one. and one that we all encounter.
So when you do like the rebuild project, does that just like recompile all the bytecode to start from fresh, or?
Yeah, I mean, it blows away.
Okay.
It really what it is it blows away all the generated artifacts. So class files, jar
Mm.
files, everything in the target directory, essentially. And IntelliJ works. I think I don't remember if IntelliJ uses the target directory. It probably does. It has this problem, which isn't a bad thing, right? It helps to, if it knows it's a Maven project, might as well do things the Maven way. But yeah, when you rebuild the project, it sort of builds it all from scratch, which is a really good thing to do. And or rather, it's a thing that you want a build system or an IDE to be able to support really easily. You don't want to have just like compiled artifacts all over the place, because then the dependencies, like one thing changes, and how do you keep everything in sync? It helps to have everything in one place, and so it can be easily rebuilt.
So a slightly related question, does Maven have like a production build command? Because I'd imagine you don't want all of like the JUnit annotations and stuff or Jacoco annotations like when you go to build the production app.
Yes. Yeah, it's a different build phase. And actually, let me think about how all of that works. The answer is yes, there are plugins out there. Honestly, I haven't used them that much because I'm not really, for this course, I'm not really doing it. We do things differently at work. But actually, that is a very important thing to think about as you are building applications, or what is the code that you want to deploy to production or to release to your customers versus things that only live back at the factory. And like your tests are a prime example. And certainly, yes, when you've done something like annotated things. And actually, though, right. For instance, the web application, I'm thinking here, I think the classes that are, I think the class files that are enhanced by Jacoco aren't the ones that go into the jar, or at least not by default. I think you have to take extra steps for it to do that. So what it does is it builds the jar file, and that has the unannotated classes in it. But then when you run your tests, yeah, it runs it against a different set of annotated class files that probably live just on the file system in a different directory. I'm pretty sure that's the way it works. Because yeah, you wouldn't want annotated class files to end up in your artifacts to get deployed to production or to the artifact repository.
Oh, that's really interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Cool. Okay. That's everything I wanted to do for Project 5. And my intent, though, is that for next week, please focus on Project 4. Or rather, I expect that you'll focus your coding on Project 4. Although it's not due next week. Okay, so you've got a couple weeks to do that. That's cool. Actually, this is probably a good week to sort of finish off the cones, get caught up, catch your breath. But please be sure to watch the Foundations of the Web lecture before next time, because what we will be doing in class is really diving into this code to look at it. And next week there's not a pair programming, and we don't start mob programming until the 22nd. So really, next week is you're watching me code again. You won't be coding with each other. Nice. Okay. Not hearing any other questions. Let's take a break. Let's take 12 minutes. Let's reconvene at 6:50, and we'll do our last pair programming kata, and then that'll be it for tonight. Excellent. Yeah. I will see you back at 6:50. Okay, we're back. So we learned all about Project 4, but now we're just going to spend the rest of the class in our final pair programming activity. And I can't tell by looking at the list who's paired and who hasn't already. So the kata that we're going to be working on is this lags kata. And so I'm just going to post it here so people can start reading it over, but we'll talk about it a little bit. But just as a reminder, in terms of how we do this, there is, there is the kata's repository that everybody shared. And actually, is there anybody on the call who hasn't worked in this repository yet, who hasn't made a clone, and who hasn't participated in any of the pair programming activities yet? It's fine if you haven't.
I haven't, but I've made the clone, but I haven't participated in any
Okay.
of the activities yet.
Oh, good. There are a couple of people. So let's see here. I think what I'll do. Let's see. And Andrew, was that you who said that you created the clone already?
No, that was Adam.
Oh no, sorry, Adam. Okay, so Andrew, Cheng, and Dan have it. So I think let's see here. Well, the first thing, let me post the URL to that. Because probably if you're a first timer, you might want to pair with someone who's done it before. So let's see here. Here is the URL, and oh, also, I don't know if you've watched the lecture where we talk about an introduction to pair programming, but if you haven't, here is the handout with some explanation there. But basically, what we're going to do tonight is continue to explore pair programming. I encourage you to adopt a driver and a navigator role. Switch roles every couple of minutes. Have someone have a timer. And the driver is the person who's focused very tactically, just typing stuff into the keyboard. And the navigator is someone who's thinking more strategically and is thinking about, what is the next test that we want to write, or hey, what's the next refactoring that we could do. And this helps the pair go fast and helps the pair get code done while also making sure that it works for the present and for the near future. And again, I encourage you to switch roles every few minutes. So, and if you haven't already, please send me your Git username, and what I will do is I will make you a collaborator on the repository, and this will allow you to contribute to the coding activity. So let's talk about our Kata. Oh, thanks. Debugger Dan, I like that one. Nice copy of it. Cool, and so then I'm going to invite you to this. You should receive an email from. You receive an email from GitHub. With the ability, and what this will allow you to do is push to the repository. So what we've been experimenting with this term, and actually it's worked out pretty well, is that everybody uses the same GitHub repository. And the nice thing about this is that in years past, I've had students create their own GitHub repositories, and oh my gosh, it's blown away like somewhere between 10 and 30 minutes of the Kata time. So it's actually saved us a lot of time, let people focus on pair programming and not setting up a repository. Yes. Thanks. Good. I think I got the 3 people. So please make sure that you have a checkout of the repository and open it up in IntelliJ. And what you'll see is a whole ton of Maven projects. This has got a lot of stuff because I create basically a room for everybody and for each pair. And so let's see here. I have 10 rooms. I have just about 10. Let me go back to the Zoom. I think 10 rooms would be enough for tonight. So let's see. How about you folks who are here in the classroom pick room 10? And so that leaves us with 9 other rooms. And we've got, oh great, we've got 16 participants, including me, so we should be fine with 8 breakout rooms. Okay. So, so as you're working with the IntelliJ project, please do a git pull if you had a checkout already. You should see that there is a set of lags projects, and when you go into your room, just choose the project that's there for you. Just like in the other code that you've seen before, there's a main class that is for your room and for this kata. So speaking of the kata, this kata, I chose it a while ago and I looked at it over the weekend. I'm like, oh yeah, this one maybe it's this one might require some discussion either amongst ourselves or certainly the pair before we sort of dive right in. So it's not like the Roman numeral one where the domain was like really easy to understand. Instead, we have like a little. Here's the problem that we're going to solve with this kata. So we're basically modeling a little airline company, and it's only got one plane. And so what happens is their customers call up and say, hey, tomorrow I want to go someplace, and it's at this time, and it costs this much. And I want to go someplace at this time. Here's how long it takes to get there, and here's how much I will pay for that. And then someone comes in the next morning and takes all these requests, has to figure out which ones they'll fulfill towards maximizing the amount of flights. Actually, not the amount of flights, maximizing the amount of money that they can make by choosing appropriate flights. So the input to this program, and I don't know if you want to focus on parsing the input as much as you do just actually the logic of the program, has things like first is a flight name or flight number. So okay, AF514, and then the let's see here, the first column is the start time of the flight, so when the flight leaves. The second column is the duration, and then this is column 1, 0 offset, has the start time, and it's just an hour from 1 to 12 or whatever. Has the duration, how long it takes to get there, and then how much they'll pay for it. And so what the program does then is it takes this data and analyzes it and comes up with what is the combination of flights that they could have, or that they could actually fly that would get them the most money. And basically what you need to look at is, hey, this flight is going to be in the air from hour 0, 4 or 5 hours. And so since you're in the air at like hour 3, you can't also have this flight right here that starts at hour 3 and goes for 7 hours. So this is kind of like looking for overlaps in the data and try to arrange things so that you can do as many flights as possible and don't worry about actually like destinations and stuff. But if you have this sample data, what you want to be able to choose is airlines flights AF514 and BA01, because this gets them the maximum amount of 10 plus 8 or $18. That is a budget airline right there. Now you could also have AF514 and AF515 because there's no overlap between the two, right? It starts at 0 and goes for 5, and then starts at hour 5 and goes for 9. But that only would give you $17. So that's what the domain problem is. And I have to admit that when I look at this, I don't know exactly how to solve it. So I encourage you to maybe take the first couple of minutes and sort of explore like what the algorithm's going to be, or hey, maybe what are some of the cases that you need to think about. At least that's what I would do if I was approaching this. So I think that's what I wanted to do to introduce it. Any questions on this before we dive in?
So are we going to create like a sample file or like files to read that from, or just use like a strings?
Yeah, you could. But while learning how to read stuff from files is a good lesson. You've already done that. So if you want to focus really on the logic of it, if you just want to like create an object or something with this information, that's probably okay too. Um, Maybe that's part of the exercise. You can figure out, hey, who wants to focus on what. But yeah, sample files. But or even just probably honestly, if I was to do it, I just like write some unit tests where this guy got chunk of text that I send in. I would literally send in this chunk of text and say, hey, interpret that, and then I expect the answer to be 18, and start from there. But it's really up to
Cool,
you
thanks.
and your partner to figure out how best to approach it. Because again, I don't have the answers because I haven't done this one. Okay. I am going to create 8 breakout rooms, although I think we probably only need 7 of them. That's the only thing that's there. And I let you all choose your rooms. So I'm going to create those. I'm going to open the rooms now. I'm going to let me know if you need some help, and I will come into your room and help you. I'll also sort of wander around and make sure everybody's gotten off to a good start. Sound cool? Okay. I'm going to pause the recording.
Excellent. Oh, sorry. Well, we missed all that for posterity, but that's okay. Excellent. Good. Glad you had a good experience. Adam and Matt in room 2. What was your experience like?
Yeah, it was also my first time doing the pair programming, and Matt was a ton of help getting everything started. So that was really great. I really enjoyed being able to kind of like bounce ideas off of each other, and like it was interesting to see how somebody else would approach the problem and kind of gave me some more insight to some other aspects of the problem I might not have thought of like as soon if I was just doing it on my own. So it was really positive overall for me.
Cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel about the same. It was a lot of fun. I think this was kind of a more, I did the first pair programming as well, and this one definitely was a lot more difficult. Like just getting off the ground. I don't even think we really touched the core algorithm that much because we were just talking a lot about like bouncing ideas about how we would structure the data, what like containers we'd put it in, whether we should take things from like the command line, the arguments, should we use like resource files. So yeah, it was a lot. We talked a lot about just kind of like general project and program structuring more than we did about the actual algorithm.
Good. Good deal. Well, good learning all around. Sounds awesome. Thanks for sharing. Room 3, Cheng and Max. What was your experience like?
I ran into some technical difficulties with IntelliJ, so it was a little tricky, but yeah, it was great. It was fun to work with Cheng, and pretty helpful to have someone to like talk it over and kind of reason through the logic with. It was kind of tricky to write tests further on, but I feel like we were pretty close to a good solution. So
yeah, I really like it. I feel like if I do it by myself, I wouldn't have made that much progress. Only with myself. Yeah.
Excellent. Great. Room 5, Devin and Theo. What was your pairing experience like?
Well,
Go ahead.
I'll go. We had some lofty goals at the beginning. Like I saw it and I was like, oh, we can memorize this. And we kind of went in circles with that for a long time. And then it kind of, I don't know, we felt probably both of us kind of got a little bit defeated there towards the end, but at least we had solidarity in each other, knowing that we couldn't figure it out, or at least not figure it out like in the span of it. And then like as we were sitting here, I like messaged Devin. I was like, I think we needed to sort it by start time to start with, and then when we could have done it. And it's just funny because like sometimes, I don't know, sometimes it's better for me, even though pair programming is great, but just to kind of like think about the problem in my own head for a little bit instead of like feeling like I gotta contribute to the pair programming process. So I don't know, pros and cons.
Yeah, actually, Theo, now you say that, we totally did do that in that 350 class. Now that I'm remembering it's all coming back to me now. But anyways, I digress.
Sweet, excellent. Thank you for sharing that. Room 6, Dan and Shrioshi. What were your experiences like?
This was my first time, and it was great. I think there is this one phenomenon in CS. It's I think everyone here rolls their eyes when anyone mentions it, but it's like the rubber ducky effect, where you are able to, if you're able to talk to anyone, and especially if they are also in the same class, it's really effective for getting thoughts out. And when you're coding, it is really nice to have that other pair kind of think for you, so that I think if you're trying to do both at once, it's kind of, it can get difficult to actually keep track of what logic you're trying to implement, and also like exceptions to the cases that you're trying to test. I think it was kind of like it was really like anticlimactic for us, because we were literally at the solution. We just needed to write it down. We first thought of the Dijkstra's algorithm, but reversed, because we're trying to find the highest cost. And then I think I said depth of first travel, using all possible paths the flights have, using the second and third parameters as departure hour and arrival hour respectively, and using that list, we would iterate, probably would have the recursive, and then return like the highest cost out of all those paths. But that just takes time.
Nice. Cool. Yeah. We'll I'm curious to hear like how people went about solving it. But here, folks in the room. Oh, sorry. Are you either of you? I didn't ask. Are you on Zoom? No. Yeah. How about you do that? And in the meantime, I will. While you're doing that, I will. I want to talk about. Oops. Let's see here. Can everybody still hear me? Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
Great. Thanks. So yeah, well, actually, the first thing, while you all were working, I looked at the project 3 submissions and gave feedback to people that had like big bugs and stuff. And then I started thinking about the problem, and so like I drew this. I too sort of thought, okay, this seems like it's a graphing problem, and so I sort of drew out this map, this the sort of almost Gantt chart looking like thing, to figure out, oh yeah, where things overlapped. And then where I was going towards was then coming up with a graph that you would walk. And so then for each, so you have these flights, and yeah, I think you can sort them by start time, and then you have a graph which is like, hey, this flight and all of the flights that that could go after it. And then I think you build up a graph, and then you end up walking the graph and doing a depth first reversal to figure out what is the maximum, basically. I suppose people in the room can't see me because I can't see it because I'm standing in front of it. Sorry. Like what is the maximum cost you can get for any traversal through the graph? Of course, I didn't actually code any of this, and so I don't know if it's right or not. And I was thinking about how to do that. But yeah, this is a neat one. Yeah, graph problems. How did other people solve it though, or how did other people think about representing the data and the relationship in between it?
I think it slowly became this crippling realization that we can't get away with just an iterative list of integers, and like this has to be a graph.
Oh, can't do it just with integers, sure, yeah.
And then I started pulling up my CS350 algorithms materials to see where is Dijkstra's algorithm, where is the depth first search.
Right. Oh yeah, Max was talking about, let's see here, maximizing the ratio of cost departure time. Oh, interesting. Yeah, maybe. I don't know about if we get the overlap right or not. Okay. Cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking about it. I don't know how efficient this would be, but I was thinking just like greedy first picking the highest. If you had a ordered list of the most valuable ones, and then you just checked compatibilities. You took the most valuable one, the most valuable flight, and then checked down the list. Does the second most valuable flight work with that? Does the third most valuable flight work with that? And then just creating like groupings of the most valuable solutions.
Yeah.
I'm not sure whether that worked.
Yeah, I don't know if there's like a counter case where it's like you have like one really long flight that's worth a lot, but then you have a bunch of smaller flights. But if you add them together, yeah. But anyway, no, cool. That's great. I think these are the kind of things that they like ask on job interviews at places that you probably don't want to work anyway. But you know, yeah, you never know. Cool.
Yeah, I remember I was talking about it with Adam. I don't know if anybody's ever looked at the MIT OpenCourseWare algorithms course, but I'm pretty sure this problem is covered in like the first class or the second class.
Oh, nice.
If anybody was curious.
Excellent. Thanks for I guess that's I'm trying to think though. Have I ever solved anything like this? I've never had to use that in my career, so that's probably why my career maybe isn't as fulfilling as other people would think it would be. Okay, cool, excellent. Hey, folks in the room, dudes. Okay, so I will. Let's see here. I'm just going to unplug the speakers so you don't hear yourselves. Oh, there's a different Zoom link. Should only be. Really? Sorry about that. Let me. Oh, there you are. Oh, so quick then. Okay.
All right.
Okay, there you go. Awesome.
So this is Logan. I'm Leo. So initially what we did was
all here in person is so novel. Show me.
Just the three of us. So initially what we did was that we of course brute forced it. And I think Logan and I pretty much immediately figured out that if say, for example, we had 3 flights and we did A, B, and C, and if we use a for loop, if the best route would be A, C, B, but we didn't have C and C, and then logically that wouldn't have worked. So, I mean, to be honest, I've seen this question before. So,
had you seen the answer before, though?
I mean, I've seen the answer before, and then we looked at it again.
Nice.
No, I mean, it's one of those like you need to like sort the list, and then we did build a list for the lags. I mean, the flights, and then we also tried sorting it. But the thing is, like, we need a memo, and then sort it, and then write the actual. We figured to do a binary search to find the best fitting flight. The next one, but it's too much work.
All right. Well, and we only it took like whatever it was, an hour. Nice. Good deal. Awesome. Okay. Well, thanks, guys. Let's see here. I think I'm done with this.
Okay. Well, let's see here. That's everything for tonight. So great. We will dive next week into, and actually, can everybody still hear me? Yeah, everybody can still hear me. Next week will be all about Project 5. And you won't be doing any coding during class. It'll all be me. So kind of like what we did back in the first couple of weeks. But then not next week or the week after that, we're going to be doing some mob programming. And so then I'm really curious about your experiences with that and how they compare and contrast with the pair programming. So I hope you all had a good time tonight. Thank you to everybody who participated. And I will see you again next week. I'm looking forward to it. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, David.
Thank you.